Good afternoon, everybody. Grateful to be with us here at ULT San Diego for the Aquarian series. This evening's presentation is entitled Buddhi Yoga, given to us by Joe Miller. So to begin this evening's presentation, we offer a reading from the voice of the silence. The rose must become the bud, born of its parent stem, before the parasite has eaten through its heart and drunk its life sap. The golden tree puts forth its jewel buds before its trunk is withered by the storm. The pupil must regain the child state he has lost, ere the first sound can fall upon his ear. The light from the one master, the one unfading golden light of spirit, shoots its effulgent beams on the disciple from the very first. Its rays thread through the thick, dark clouds of matter. Now here, now there, these rays illuminate like sunsparks light the earth through the thick foliage of the jungle growth. But, O disciple, unless the flesh is passive, head cool, the soul as firm and pure as flaming diamond, the radiance will not reach the chamber. Its sunlight will not warm the heart, nor will the mystic sounds of the Akashic heights reach the ear, however eager, at the initial stage. We give you Mr. Joseph Miller.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Monica. I wonder, this probably should have been done beforehand, but I wonder if there might be an intrepid, fun-loving individual who would be able to read a few passages as we go along. So we have a little variety in the voice. There's some Gita passages, and I wonder if there's anyone who I might be able to call on when we get there. Okay, Kirk and Desiree, I think that would be fine. Okay. All right, well, that'll help. Good afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you are. And I'm glad that a group of us can come together and put our minds and hearts on an interesting and intriguing topic. Yeah, I've been enjoying thinking about it, and I hope that you will find my thinking somewhat stimulating, and it can help us engage in a conversation.
The concern is with action alone, never with its fruits. Let not the fruit of thy work be thy motive, nor take refuge in abstinence from works. Steadfast in mind, in yoga, do thy works, O Dhananjaya, casting off attachment, the same in success and failure. Equal-mindedness is called yoga. Verily, action is far inferior to the discipline of wisdom, Buddhi Yoga, O Dhananjaya. In wisdom seek thou shelter. Pitiable are they whose motive is the fruit of works. He who is yoked to wisdom, Buddhi Yukta, lets go both what is well done and what is ill done. Therefore, yearn for yoga. Yoga is skill in the performance of action. Sages yoked to wisdom, Buddhi Yukta, renounce the fruits of action, and thus freed from the bondage of births, attain to the state of stainless bliss.
Thank you, Kirk. So this, if you recall what's happening in the second chapter, Krishna is talking Arjuna out of his despondency. Krishna first begins with this extraordinary statement affirming immortality, which is to comfort a warrior who's about to see a lot of death. And then he brings up normative considerations and reputation in an argument for why he should engage in action. And then he says, these have been considerations through Sankhya or analysis. He said, and then he says, now let me explain to you the path of yoga or engagement. And then this is where this comes. So this is why there's the line where Buddhi Yoga comes in is action is far inferior to the discipline of wisdom. And it is through this path, he says, that Arjuna will escape the bonds of karma. And he also, in this passage, points out the hypocrisy of the religionists who are caught up only in the dead letter of the Vedas and are actually attached to the world and attached to desires and construe the path of the Vedas actually to guarantee good karma so that they enjoy whatever they want in future lives. So this is he's gone from an external considerations of norms and social function and all of that to an internal determination. So this discipline of wisdom is an internal consideration, and this term Buddhi Yukta is significant. Of course, Yukta is similar to yoga, but it's to be bound. This is a kind of a literal translation here, yoked to wisdom, bound to wisdom. And there's just a few lines after this before that passage on the self-governed sage. And so it really, you can see that the notion of Buddhi Yoga launches Arjuna's question, because Arjuna says, well, after he's described Buddhi Yukta, Arjuna says, well, now tell me, what is this Buddhi Yukta? What is this Stita Prajna, this individual who is established firmly in wisdom, this union with wisdom? So that whole answer is based on this statement of Buddhi Yoga. In Raghavan Iyer's article, which I do recommend, on Buddhi Yoga and Svadharma, this addresses actually that passage. Buddhi Yoga requires a fixity and steadfastness in intuitive, intelligent determination, which is superior to Karma Yoga, the yoga of works, as a means of gaining enlightenment. It involves an eye capable of recognizing essentials, which once awakened will give a decisiveness without wavering or wandering. Through this resolute intellect, one's actions may become shadowless, nichaya. And in another place in that article, over 5,000 years ago, Lord Krishna anticipated this condition of Varnashankar, the confusion of castes. Although it will increase and proceed through the entirety of Kali Yuga, it will also provide an opportunity for those who engage consciously and voluntarily in a discipline of intuitive determination, Buddhi Yoga. So why will it provide an opportunity? Why will Varnashankar, this confusion of castes, this melding, this dissolving of fast social structures and divisions and mixing of castes, why would this provide an opportunity? Because individuals won't be able to rely on external moral supports and structures. And so, what is it? William Penn, I think, said, in as much as you are not determined by outer means, rely all the more on your inner resources. So as others have written about the Kali age, it provides great inward opportunities. And maybe Desiree can read. This is where Buddhi Yoga comes up in the 10th chapter.
Adhyaya, I am the origin of all. All things proceed from me. Believing me to be thus, the wise gifted with spiritual wisdom worship me. Their very hearts and minds are in me, enlightening one another and constantly speaking of me. They are full of enjoyment and satisfaction. To them, thus always devoted to me, who worship me with love, I give that mental devotion, Buddhi Yoga, by which they come to me. For them do I, out of my compassion, standing within their hearts, destroy the darkness which springs from ignorance by the brilliant lamp of spiritual discernment.
Thank you, Desiree. So this is the passage that comes right before the enumeration of the divine excellences. Chapter 10 is this celebration of the divine excellences. And you will recall, Krishna's recitation of, I am the ego which is seated in the hearts of all beings. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end. Among Adityas, I am Vishnu. Among luminous bodies, I am the sun. It's that chapter. And this is the part right before this. It's as if Krishna is saying that the Arjuna cannot appreciate these divine excellences without this gift of mental devotion. And this is interesting that mental devotion is something given in this passage. It's a kind of prasada, a kind of grace, which also is in the 18th chapter, in the reference to it, it's also considered in that way. So this is significant and interesting. In Sri Raghavan's article, he says that that in the path of Buddhi Yoga, one can't just think of it as an individualistic striving, but the very sense of agency softens and dissolves. And in that way, it's like music or love. If you go to a great concert, that a musician becomes, their sense of agency dissolves. They become carried along. In some sense, they merge into something much larger than themselves. And that certainly is the sensation of the musician as well. And of course, this is very true in love. Love is not an act of egotistic assertion at all, but it's to feel the magnetic pull of the beloved. And yes, right. Okay, so this is that passage. Krishna affirms Buddhi as wisdom itself and inseparable from himself, something that no human being can develop except by the grace of the Lord. All expressions of intelligence, whether latent, partial, or highly specialized, whether precise, diffused, or merely potential, whether in a dog or an adept, are drops in one universal shoreless ocean of cosmic Buddhi. Therefore, no human being can develop Buddhi Yoga on the basis of individualistic conceptions of progress. One cannot simply say to oneself that because one has seen through one's illusions, one is now going to become an apprentice in Buddhi Yoga. And maybe passing back to Kirk, would you read the passage from the 18th chapter?
So chapter 18, verse 57. And even the man who is always engaged in action shall attain by my favor to the eternal and incorruptible, imperishable abode, if he put his trust in me alone. With thy heart place all thy works on me, prefer me to all else, exercise mental devotion, Buddhi Yoga, continually, and think constantly of me. By so doing, thou shalt by my divine favor surmount every difficulty which surroundeth thee.
Again, there's this notion of divine favor, of prasada, of energy or assistance, of being again, of losing one sense of a strictly individualistic sense of agency. This passage especially significant, it comes at the near the very end of the Gita. And remember, Arjuna is a man of action. And this right before this passage, there's a very lofty description made of the man who has reached perfection, how this man who has reached perfection attains to the Supreme Spirit. But this is not Arjuna. This is somebody more advanced than Arjuna. And then he says he makes a pivot here. And the text goes from the third voice to the imperative voice, where he's addressing Arjuna again. And he says, he's discussed this man who merges with Krishna. And he says, but even the man who is always engaged in action, i.e. Arjuna, shall attain by my favor to the eternal and incorruptible, imperishable abode, if he puts his trust in me alone. And this note of exclusivity is also very important to Buddhi Yoga. That it's a yoga in that sense that it's in a full wholehearted dedication. It's exclusive. And this is what he says: with thy heart place all thy works on me. This is for the man of action. Prefer me to all else, but also exercise mental devotion. So your hands and feet are busy, but your mind is at rest. And in Dhyanaśvar's commentary, which HBB praises, has a very deep mystic work. If you don't know about the Dhyanaśvari, I think it's 11th century, 12th century mystic who did an expanded version of the Gita. So he fills in a lot of dialogue in between. But we find these themes I'm trying to draw out in this as well. O warrior, this renunciation consists in performing thy appointed duties while at the same time concentrating thy mind on discrimination. So this Buddhi Yoga is this balance for the person of action between mind and action. Why the person of action does not necessarily further bind themselves in karmic bonds because of what's going on with the mind. Fix thy mind therefore on me as a wife devoted to her husband. When the mind is continuously fixed on me, thought abandons all other objects and is devoted to me. Therefore act in such a way that thy mind, detaching itself from all actions of contemplation, is always concentrated on me. When through wholehearted devotion thy mind becomes filled with me, thou mayest know that my grace, prasada, is perfect. It's as if Buddhi Yoga is, Arjuna is taking part in the very life of Krishna, recognizing that what he thought was his life is actually the life of the Logos, the life of God. When through self-consecration, bhakti and buddhi come together, jnana is released. And jnana may lead eventually to dhyana. So we could also think of Buddhi Yoga as the yoking of buddhi and manas. If yoga is a kind of union or joining, then we can think of it in terms of the principles that the esoteric tradition of Theosophy tells us. And this is from the Key to Theosophy. Desiree, do you want to read us these lines from the Key?
Certainly. Buddhi Yoga as the yoking of buddhi and manas. The future state and the karmic destiny of man depend on whether manas gravitates more downward to kamarupa, the seat of the animal passions, or upwards to buddhi, the spiritual ego. In the latter case, the higher consciousness of the individual spiritual aspirations of mind or manas, assimilating buddhi, are absorbed by it and form the ego, which goes into devaconic bliss.
Thank you. And we are aware of the sevenfold nature that Theosophy presents. So the the yoking of Buddhi and Manas is, depending on how you count it, but usually the union of the fifth and sixth principles. And I love the idea of making the mind more loving, making the heart more rational. In the Key to Theosophy, where H.P. Blavatsky speaks about definite terms for definite things, she takes pains to distinguish Buddhi from the Buddhi Manas. Buddhi is the spiritual soul. And remember, she says we should think about a spiritual soul, a human soul, and an animal soul. And even though we may conceptually divide them in another sense, we shouldn't think of them as separate either. But Buddhi unqualified is the spiritual soul, but Buddhi Manas is the spiritual ego. So it's the Manas that provides ahankara, that may take a self-residence in Buddhi, so to speak, to have a sense of self. That's how a spiritual sense of I, a spiritual sense of agency comes about. Also, Buddhi is sometimes associated with the centrifugal energy of compassion, Manas with the centripetal focus of concentration. So that's another helpful way that when they are in balance, it is like a planet that is in a stable orbit. So there's a balance between centrifugal and centripetal. Also, that I think that image of Buddhi as centrifugal is helpful if we think of Atma as the sun, the invisible sun that we cannot see directly. Buddhi is the light, like the light that diffuses. And if we're astronomers and we want to study the sun, what we're really studying is the light that comes from the sun. So Buddhi is that diffusion. And also HPB tells us in thinking about Atma and Buddhi, we should think analogously of Parabrahm, the absolute, and Mula Prakriti, or that root matter, that refined matter. So the Parabrahm nothing can be known about it. It's absolute darkness as far as our cognitions go. The closest we can come is thinking of this veil of refined matter. And we all know the dangers of intellect without heart. Mind is the great slayer of real love. And this is interesting that HPB describes Buddhi as irrational and then gives this explanation of it in a footnote. Irrational in the sense that as a pure emanation of the universal mind, it, Buddhi, can have no individual reason of its own on this plane of matter. But like the moon, who borrows her light from the sun and her life from the earth, so Buddhi, receiving its light of wisdom from Atma, gets its rational qualities from Manas. Per se, as something homogeneous, it is devoid of attributes. So that seems to be a very helpful notion, kind of some sort of pure homogeneous moon that gets the light from the sun, but the life from the earth. So Buddhi gets its light from the Atma, but its rational qualities from Manas. And again, the distinction between individuality and spiritual soul, both the human spirit, the individuality that having to do with Manas, the reincarnating spiritual ego, and Buddhi, the spiritual soul, both are pre-existent. But while the former Buddhi Manas, exists as a distinct entity, an individualization. The soul exists as pre-existing breath, an unscient portion of an intelligent whole. An insentient probably is a synonym for unscient. So it's in union with manas that Buddhi can become active, that Buddhi can have an effect. On its own, it's removed. And sometimes when we think about a Buddhi, we think about innocence, we think of that which is pure, and I love how mystically and intuitive Henry David Thoreau is. The heart is forever in experience, right? That when we are having a abiding intuition of something eternal, time means nothing. So there is no past that would gather experience. It's a direct cognition. I love the wonder on that boy's face. Okay, no, you're not going to watch a Disney movie. But think about in many myths and stories, it seems as though the human race has intuited this Buddhi and the salvation that Buddhi can give. And I think it's very evident in the myth, in the fable, the fairy tale, Beauty and the Beast, which actually I call Buddhi and the Beast. And so that, in just briefly in that story, there is a vain and arrogant prince who is given a test unawares. An old woman comes trying to take refuge in his castle from a storm, and he rejects her, ridicules her, turns her out. Well, her old woman appearance was in fact a disguise. It was a powerful enchantress. He had failed a spiritual test, and a spell is cast upon him. He is transformed into an ugly beast, and the only way the spell can be broken is if he can learn to love beyond appearances. He has to learn to love and be loved in return, overcoming the very thing that he was incapable of, that got him into the mess in the first place. And so then there's an inventor or who happens to be passing by the castle late in the night, and he needs to take refuge somewhere because he's on the road traveling between cities. He becomes captured by the beast, and he's only let go on the condition that he sends a substitute for him. And when he goes back to the village, he tells his family this, and his daughter, Belle, decides she will self-sacrificially go back because she wants to save her father. So she becomes a hostage in the castle. And at first, the beast is only concerned selfishly about what he can get from her, that she could break the spell and help restore him. And so at first he's trying to connive how to earn her love in this way. But that utterly fails. And in the end, as he spends time, the months with her, he realizes how incredibly beautiful she is within, that he sees that her outer beauty is only a reflection of her selfless character, her intelligence, and he begins to see that his outer form is an expression of his inner condition as well. And he's deeply humbled by her presence. And he does the only thing that is noble and true, and he lets her free. He wants nothing from her. And if you think about him as representing the fallen manas, the manas that has fallen into the clutches of kama, that is preoccupied with its own suffering, that turns to the spiritual, or what it thinks is the spiritual, for what it can get from it. This is what is represented by the beast. But eventually he realizes that Buddhi, beauty, can be just loved for her own sake. She must be let go without any concerns about himself. So, in letting her go, and the drama of the story goes on, he eventually He earns her love, and he loves her in return, and the spell is broken, and they waltz beautifully. Another way of thinking about yoking to Buddhi or accessing Buddhi is to think of Buddhi as prior in consciousness to what we are typically experiencing in personal consciousness. So Buddhi is prior not in temporal terms, but in ontological degree. So in other words, Buddhi is present with us, but our coarse minds, like the beast, are not refined to receive the help of Buddhi, to cognize the splendor of Buddhi. In the wonderful English metaphysical poet Henry Vaughan has this beautiful poem called "The Retreat." And Kirk, I wonder if you can read these lines for us.
Yes. The Retreat. Happy those early days when I shined in my angel infancy, before I understood this place appointed for my second race, or taught my soul to fancy aught but a white celestial thought, when yet I had not walked above a mile or two from my first love, and looking back at that short space, could see a glimpse of his bright face. Oh, how I long to travel back and tread again that ancient track, that I might once more reach that plain where first I felt my glorious train, from whence the enlightened spirit sees that shady city of palm trees. But ah, my soul with too much stay is drunk and staggers in the way. Some men a forward motion love, but I by backward steps would move, and when this dust falls to the urn, in that state I came, return.
So in being seekers of Buddhi or the help of Buddhi, there is this sense in which ontologically we're going backwards. We're trying to reach something within and arrest the outward tendency of the kama manas and the physical senses. And Rumi, in much the same vein, out beyond duality, we have a home, and it is glory. That pure substance is different from this dusty world. What kind of place is this? We once came down, soon will return. A new happiness befriends us as we work at offering our lives. This quote from the Chinese philosopher Mencius, I got from Henry David Thoreau. If one loses a fowl or a dog, he knows well how to seek them again. If one loses the sentiments of his heart, he does not know how to seek them again. The duties of practical philosophy consist only in seeking after those sentiments of the heart which we have lost. That is all. And we're probably all familiar with these lines from The Voice, which is uncreate. And we had this reading at the start that one can see in thinking about Buddhi Yoga how much it ties in with the notion of regaining the child state. So that's such a powerful image. The rose must re-become the bud born of its parent stem before the parasite is eaten through its heart and drunk its life. So what's the parasite? The parasite is the deluded personality, the sense of egotism that is fugitive, separate, parasitic, unworthy in feeling. and utterly preoccupying the mind so that one cannot hear the voice of the silence, thus the voice of Buddhi. This is helpful in the relationship between Buddhi and Manas. We could say between innocence and experience. This is the theosophical balance, isn't there? In theosophy, we are told it's the path of action. The voice of the silence and the Gita are helping us to understand a yoga that involves being in the world, but not of the world. Not needing to escape the world to try to find our spirituality, but fulfilling our duties by nature and by man. Manas is immortal because after every new incarnation, it adds to Atma Buddhi something of itself. And thus, assimilating itself to the monad, shares its immortality. Buddhi becomes conscious by the accretions it gets from Manas after every new incarnation and the death of man. So a couple biographical examples that came to mind while thinking of the subject. Eddie Hillesum, some of you may know about her, a Jewish Dutch woman who died at Auschwitz, but during the last 4 years of her life kept a diary and also wrote letters. Lovely, brilliant person who was full of life and curiosity and courage. She volunteered to go to Westerbork, the kind of a holding camp before Jews were going to the death camps. And Russian translator, studied under a psychologist. But she seemed, we could say perhaps that this Buddhi Yoga can be facilitated by suffering, by the kind of asceticism that occurs in great suffering. And why are her diaries read? Because it's an extraordinary glimpse of a bud blowing into a flower, in a spiritual bud blowing into a flower. In those 4 years, this extraordinary awakening and this this Socratic struggling with big questions and small questions and personal insecurities and trying to discover the inner space of forgiveness that would include her German oppressors. And we can see this inner space. Ultimately, we have just one moral duty: to reclaim large areas of peace in ourselves, more and more peace, and to reflect it towards others. And the more peace there is in us, the more peace there will be in our troubled world. I believe that I know and share the many sorrows and sad circumstances that a human being can experience, but I do not cling to them. I do not prolong such moments of agony. They pass through me like life itself. As a broad, eternal stream, they become part of that stream, and life continues. And as a result, all my strength is preserved. It does not become tagged on to futile sorrow or rebelliousness. And this quote goes on. And there's an imaginary message she wants to send to someone named Ilsa Blumenthal. She says, ought we not from time to time open ourselves up to cosmic sadness? One day I shall surely be able to say to Ilsa, yes, life is beautiful, and I value it anew at the end of every day, even though I know that the sons of mothers, and you are one such mother, are being murdered in concentration camps. And you must be able to bear your sorrow. Even if it seems to crush you, you will be able to stand up again. For human beings are so strong, and your sorrow must become an integral part of yourself, part of your body and your soul. You mustn't run away from it, but bear it like an adult. Do not relieve your feelings through hatred. Do not seek to be avenged on all German mothers, for they too sorrow at this very moment for their slain and murdered sons. Give your sorrow all the space and shelter in yourself that it's due. For if everyone bears his grief honestly and courageously, the sorrow that now fills the world will abate. But if you do not clear a decent shelter for your sorrow, and instead reserve most of the space inside you for hatred and thoughts of revenge, from which new sorrows will be born for others, then sorrow will never cease in this world and will multiply. And if you have given sorrow the space its gentle origins demand, then you may truly say life is beautiful and so rich. So beautiful and so rich that it makes you want to believe in God. So these were, she was very consciously trying to maintain, this is what the diaries show, maintain an elevated perspective and recover a kind of inner space that, while keeping her feet clearly on the ground and helping with the nitty-gritties of what was going on in Amsterdam at the time. And in that inner space is forgiveness. And I think we connect that a lot. She liked the analogy of the sky above and the sky within. This morning I cycled along Station Quay, enjoying the broad sweep of the sky at the edge of the city, and breathing in the fresh, unrationed air. And everywhere, signs barring Jews from the paths in the open country. But above, the one narrow path still left to us stretches the sky intact. They can't do anything to us. They really can't. They can harass us. They can rob us of our material goods, of our freedom of movement, but we ourselves forfeit our greatest assets by our misguided compliance. And that compliance, she says, is by our feelings of being persecuted, humiliated, and oppressed, by our own hatred, by our swagger, which hides our fear. We may, of course, be sad and depressed by what has been done to us. That is only human, understandable. However, our greatest injury is one we inflict upon ourselves. I find life beautiful and I feel free. The sky within me is as wide as the one stretching above my head. I believe in God and I believe in man, and I say so without embarrassment. Life is hard, but that is no bad thing. And I'll just skip this one in terms of time, but even her intuitions as a writer, she was inspired by Japanese prints, and it made her see that she wants to aspire to be a writer who values silence as much as words. The other biographical example I wanted to mention was a memoir that I had read recently. Hélène Grimaud is the founder of the Wolf Conservation Center in South Salem, New York. What is extraordinary about her story is she's not an environmentalist. She wasn't a zoologist or something like that. She's actually a very well-known concert pianist. But I was thinking about this line that earlier I had in the presentation, that Buddhi Yoga involves an eye capable of recognizing essentials, which once awakened will give a decisiveness without wavering or wandering. That's what her story really brings about. In a sort of Socratic way in her memoir, she says, the important things cannot be taught. Culture, knowledge, and study are edifying, but they aren't enlightening. So she, after she had gone through music conservatory in Paris, she went into a period of inwardness. perhaps partly at the advice of Leon Fleischer. And she felt like something else was incubating. And what happened was she was staying in Tallahassee. She was living in Tallahassee, Florida, and studying a score late one night. And in the middle of the night, she decided to walk the dog. And it was 2 a.m. And she came upon a strange figure she saw skulking. And in fact, it was a wolf. And there was a man standing there, a Vietnam vet that her neighbors had warned her about, but who she had never met before. And all sorts of stories were surrounding him. But the wolf came up and interacted with her. Let me see if I can find that quote. The wolf's name ended up being Alawa. Slowly she approached me, my arms hung by my sides. She came up to my left hand and sniffed it. I merely stretched out my fingers, and all by herself she slid her head and then her shoulders under my palm. I felt a shooting spark, a shock, which ran through my entire body. The single point of contact radiated throughout my arm and chest and filled me with gentleness. Only gentleness? Yes, but a most compelling gentleness, which awakened in me a mysterious singing, a call of the unknown primeval force. So karmically, obviously, she was right for this as a person deeply listening. And in an instant, an extraordinarily, psychic and intuitive thing happened here. And from meeting that wolf and getting to know her neighbor's wolf and seeing the condition in which it lived, it occupied his lower floor and had made a mess of the lower floor. There really wasn't a place for it. She began to study about wolves and the conditions of wolves and the history of them, and the way she put her intellect on anything, like music. She threw herself into it. She met with government officials. She met with wolf experts. She put her, in her mid-20s, she put her piano career almost on hold when the eyes of everyone had been on her for what she was going to do. So compelling, so decisive was this call for this altruistic work that she did not advance in her repertoire. She continued to concertize and make money, but she ended up moving to New York City, living in very impoverished conditions just to save every penny, and eventually was able to find a property in New York and put down the money and start what is an extraordinary conservation center, the Wolf Conservation Center, now in South Salem, New York, that is involved in study, involved in conservation, is involved in education, has thousands of students visited every year. It's been a remarkable success. But it came from this little spark and from this flash and from an incredible decisiveness that everyone around Hélène Grimaud misunderstood. They could not understand why she seemed to be foolishly throwing her career away at the time. Again, my passion and enthusiasm were unshakable. I would have moved mountains to get what I wanted. The time of doubts, abysses, and cracks had come to an end. A primal force carried me, lifted me up, and took me much further than I could have ever imagined. My working conditions had never been more difficult for the simple reason I had no piano. And things would not have been any simpler if I had one, since I moved so frequently. Because she wasn't a citizen, she had to renew a new rental every 3 months during the years she was saving her money. I had one idea in mind, this goal, an enclosure where I could protect wolves and defend their cause, carried me along with the force of a tidal wave. Finally, I was thinking of this line from the Gita. It is even the same exhaustless, secret, eternal doctrine. I have this day communicated unto thee, because thou art my devotee and my friend. And I was thinking that, why should we think of Buddhi Yoga as some kind of individual enterprise. If we aspire to Buddhi, doesn't friendship, true friendship, become a path of Buddhi Yoga? Isn't our esteem for the Buddhic qualities in others essential? Isn't it, because the principle of Buddhi goes beyond ownership, proprietorship, individualism in that way. And there's a line from Henry David Thoreau wrote so eloquently on this. Our friends have treated us not as what we were, but as what we aspire to be. True friends. True friends expect virtues from us. A friend is one who incessantly pays us the compliment of expecting from us all the virtues, and who can appreciate them in us. It takes two to speak the truth, one to speak and one to hear. And I think this may be my last slide. But sometimes we are said to love another, that is, to stand in a true relationship to him, so that we give the best to and receive the best from him, between whom there is a hearty truth, there is love. And in proportion to our truthfulness and confidence in one another, our lives are divine and miraculous in answer to our ideal. And I think that's a beautiful description of the relationship between Krishna and Arjuna. And I think the ideal of brotherhood between theosophists too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Boy, I'll tell you, such compelling readings. And I think the ones that really hit me, moved me the most, were the ones from personal experiences. I think because as human beings, we can experience similar types of situations. And wanted to hear from both Helene and from Eddie. I don't know. It was just very, very compelling and very moving for me. I'm so happy that you brought those in. So it kind of brings it into a human perspective. And it's great to study philosophy, which we do every day, and contemplate its abstractness, but to bring it down to where we live is also very, very important, especially in terms of understanding compassion. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I'm so glad it struck you in that way. And yes, of course, the language of life is life itself, and that's why novels and stories will always be there, because that verbal language is secondary. It's experience itself that really is where truth is found. Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, it's open for questions. Judy, go ahead.
Oh, yes, Joe, thank you for a very thorough and moving description of the many aspects of Buddhi Yoga. And my cat and I would like to inquire about something Nandini Iyer used to say quite a bit, that when you're suspending the results of your action, as in Gita 2, that although it's impossible not to desire, you do not desire anything for your personal self. And I think that's a very important idea in Buddhi Yoga. And also that your action may be different than you thought it would be, as the example of the young pianist who became a wolf protector and advocate. She had probably never thought before she met that wolf that was going to be part of her dharma in life. So I wonder if you could say more about the importance of suspending the fruits or results of action as acting. We all act toward an end, but that end should not be our personal self. For example, when I first taught at Cal Poly, I remember an administrator came out and said, "You all want to win the Distinguished Teacher Award, don't you?" And I thought, well, if that is my motive for teaching, then I'm leaving right now.
Huh.
As I tried to teach that others might learn. Well, I didn't always succeed, I must admit. But I thought that was a terrible motive to give the faculty, was kind of, you've got to compete with each other and get this for yourself. And so we need to move in life in a way that you describe Buddhi Yoga. The distinction between the higher Buddhi manas and the lower Kama manas is made here, and I think beautifully by you. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And thank you to the cat. Although I don't know the cat's name.
Pandora,
Pandora.
big troublemaker, yes.
Thanks, Pandora.
Yeah, that's right. Your question opens up Pandora's box. When I was first in the early 80s, when I was first introduced to the Gita, I was at the same time in college studying Kant's moral philosophy. And I thought that was a great karmic benefit to have that advantage. And later I found out there are scholars who compare the nishkama karma, the renunciation of fruits of actions, with what Kant says. But Kant said that in any action there's a material and a formal aspect. The material is what are the concrete circumstances and compelling desires and interests involved, but the formal aspect is the principle of the action, and therefore what we want to call duty. And even though it sounds so simple, the path of the Gita is to act out of the sake of duty, and we have to think about what that means. We have to think about it and feel what it means. To have a sense of duty is to have some primary loyalty to a larger whole that one's a part of. So one has to some degree, go a little bit at least beyond egotism. Otherwise, duty is simply what is being dictated from outside by norms, by standards, by rules, by and that Kant said that following all of those things given to one by recognized authorities is not true morality. It can't be true morality. True morality has to come from a sense, a feeling of duty, of belonging to something larger, something nobler, and have that be the determination of your action. Now, that doesn't mean that your actions don't have a material component. They do. They will always come in a context and a circumstance. There will always be aspects, but one is not to be doing it for the sake of those things. And the more one can feel spiritually content and not be engaging in actions out of a sense of deficit, the more one can come from a sense of duty. So contentedness is very important. As the Buddha said, contentedness is like a well-thatched roof. Desires can't leak in. And you will also recall that the end of chapter 17 of the Gita, we believe, Krishna gives the great name of God as Om Tat Sat. And Dhyanaśvar gives this description of, he says, well, you can have that name, but you have to know how to use it. And Dhyanaśvar says, to use it, you have to see Om is to consecrate. Every action has to be consecrated with Om. But the moment you bring that kind of power to any action, any power of concentration, there will be fruits arising. So you immediately say Tat, as if to say, not mine. And he says, but that still leaves you in a sense of Dvaita, of duality. So the utterance of Sat is to affirm the one truth, the one unity. So there's some kind of archetypal attitude there that I think is very close, is some kind of a key, I think, to what you're talking about.
We have Jonathan. Jonathan, you have your hand up.
Say here you are.
Hello,
Ryan.
Hi, Joe. Hi. We have two questions. One first from me, and then Kirk is going to ask a question. First of all, just brilliant, amazing presentation. Thank you so much for that. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I wanted to ask you about, I loved the Beauty and the Beast that you brought in there. I thought that was really relevant. As a young person myself, mostly amongst college students and high school students, we see a lot of people get very caught up in insecurity and outer appearance. We see this a lot with women and the objectification of women and their physical appearance. But even as a guy myself, I mean, I remember being 14, 15 years old, feeling like inadequate, not enough because of my physical appearance. I was a little bit undersized back then. And so I just wanted to hear if you had maybe more to say about that and how we can begin to move more into that space of inner beauty, where true beauty resides in all beings, regardless of external form. And then also how that does relate to how we deal with the appearance of things outwardly. Because I think that what you just brought up was very relevant and very beautiful. So thank you. That's my question. Then after you give us a wonderful answer on that, Kirk is going to come up and ask a question as well.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. I'm glad that spoke to you. That movie came out when my daughter was an infant, and I remember feeling slightly guilty escaping to the movies one night while my wife was taking care of the baby. But I found that story so compelling, and I don't know that I really have more to say. I think it's just worth thinking over about that. If the prince who falls under the spell represents the kama manas, the manas falling under the influence of kama, and through selfishness and vanity, becoming disfigured and becoming estranged. Like the only what because it is like a spell. I mean, we fall under the spell of separation. We fall under the spell of judgmentalism and of desire and insufficiency, and it clouds our access to who we really are and what we really might be. So, but I loved that it kind of ties in with the Gita's notion of grace, that because the beast can't just pull himself out. The kama manas, the manas can't just find redemption through some kind of exertion or exercise routine, but it has to gravitate through selfless love to the fluorescence of buddhi, and it has to feel that magnetic pull, and the strength and the insight and intuition that comes from that principle. So I agree. It's very compelling, and it's right there in front of our face. I mean, I've always wondered about these Disney writers, not just Beauty and the Beast, but a whole bunch of those movies. There's some pretty enlightened stuff right under the surface, and I've often wanted to crash those writers' meetings and find out, hey, what's going on here? Kirk?
Thanks very much, Joe. It was really all the points many of the points you brought out were so unexpected to me. And that's what I really enjoyed about the talk. And also because I've known you for many years as a friend, and I expect all virtues to be represented in your nature. I'm going to raise what I think is perhaps a difficult question, but also not unrelated to this idea of finding beauty in everything. And it has to do with the quote from Hermes for this theme: analogy and correspondence require the renunciation of linear ratiocination in favor of alchemical transformation. And of course, that this inclusion of the idea of analogy and correspondence, which is so critical to the understanding the metaphysics of Theosophia, and the capacity to see in the small, to see the large in the small, to see the star in the glowworm, as Sir Edwin Arnold put it, to see the cosmic in the human, right? That seems to be part of the effort we're making to link manas with buddhi, or with sometimes is talked about as the linking of manas and mahat. So it's that cosmic element which was in one of your quotes. So I was just wondering if you could discuss that a little bit more, the importance of why this, it's so central to the awakening of buddhi to begin to incorporate and understand analogy and correspondence.
Thank you. Very good question. And yeah, leave it to me to leave the lead quote out. That sounds like the kind of thing I do. It is striking how much emphasis theosophical teachers have put on analogy and correspondence. And it reminds me when I was reading Emerson's essays, he writes about the writer and he says you could tell the force, the development of a writer, of their intellect and their writing ability by their use of analogy. The really good writer will be constantly vivifying and explaining what they're doing by resorting to analogy. And then he also goes through a bunch of common words and shows that analogies are everywhere. Analogies, all the common words that we have around us, they have often physical, objective facts that they came from. So it is essential that we see, those sorts of parallels. And without even trying, there was a lot of analogy in my presentation as well. I think that it's the dangers of the reason beating a dead horse. It represents, there's something kama manasik about wanting to possess truth and to seize it, to encapsulate it in some definition, some formulation, some particular angle, and then fall under the delusion that we own it and possess it. And in doing so, we cut it off from the spiritual vitality in which real ideas exist. Because real ideas are, they're not things. They're living currents. They're like the current of a river or the current of electricity in your house. The breaker, in trying to seize it and capture it in terms of reason and language and cognition in that way is like pulling the breaker and the current gets cut off. And you're really left deluding yourself, thinking that you possess it. You don't possess it. I mean, it's like a great book. You say, you have an illuminating experience reading the Bhagavad Gita or Rumi or something, and then it sits on your shelf. You don't really possess it until you pick that book up and reinstitute the current. And we can be in different stages at different times, and the current may not even come, even though we possess the book. So spiritual knowledge is this living, it's like a living current. And analogy and correspondence somehow, of course, represents that kind of flexibility to move from the small to the great, to see, to discern relevant features from one thing to the other. And also as seekers of truth and as sharers in the Dharma of trying to articulate the truth for ourselves and share it to one another, analogy is very important in communicating theosophical ideas to one another. So it's a very important idea, and when we are intuitive, we experience that kind of flexibility of mentality, and we become more aware of very subtle leaps of mind. We can hopefully develop the kind of mental space where we can be more sensitive to them. If we have a very noisy head with a lot of concerns, a lot of anxieties, a lot of desires, we can't hear the subtle, if not the voice of the silence, the voice of the near silence, the voice of the whisper. And that's what we have to be tuned into, so we have to create the space where we can hear that. And I think also notice on the edges of sleep the way your mind works. Sometimes you dip into a nap and you pull out of it, and you can be in awe out of a completely different kind of mental activity than what you're used to in the personal mind. It's vivid, rapid. It's all analogy. So it seems to be the language of the soul, to use Robert Crosby's phrase.
And we have another hand up. I'm not sure if Jonathan has another. Oh, no, not Jonathan. Let's go ahead, please, with your question.
Arun Parshottam. And you're muted right now.
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay.
I think, Joseph, that's called a hypnagogic state. But I just want to go back to your comment before about rules, and true morality comes from within and not the outside set of rules. But is that from the Bhagavad Gita? Because you mentioned the Bhagavad Gita afterwards.
Well, don't you think that's part of his message in chapter 2, where he is? I mean, of course, later on he says, one has to consult Holy Writ about everything, but he speaks about the hypocrisy of the merely formalists of the Vedic practices at the time.
Yeah.
Because after all, what is the arguments that start the whole Gita? The arguments that Arjuna gives out are basically pedantic and normative, and he's caught in false reasoning. And Krishna is starting off by bringing him down a few notches and saying, look, I mean, even at the very start, you're mourning and weeping and grieving for things that the wise would never grieve about. And yet you're using the words of the wise. You're using the words of the wise without understanding them. You're using them to your purposes. So, and then he speaks about, when he introduces the Buddhi Yoga, he says he's given yoga according to Sankhya, now he's going to give yoga according to Buddhi, according to wisdom. He says that, look at these Vedic ritualists who actually are very much attached to the world, and you have to find a determination that's different than that. You have to find an inward determination, and even engaging as a soldier, it's not merely enough that he follow the rules that are laid down, but he has to find, if it's going to be karmaless, he has to find this inner determination to engage in the battle.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
Well, incidentally, a few weeks ago on the series, someone mentioned that reading through the Bhagavad Gita for 6 years, 700 verses at 3 verses a week. And I remember at Palmas North, we did it in 7 years.
Oh.
Went through it in 7 years. So I learned a lot, but I just must have skipped this one.
Thank you. Any questions out there? Comments? Jonathan, Monica?
Just to say thank you so much by delving into the Gita in the way that you have. It just offers a deeper perspective, and I really received that. And this student felt much in need of that. So beautiful.
Thank you, Monica.
Hello there, Desiree. This is Ken.
Ken.
Hi there, Joe. Thank you so much for this amazing perspective on Buddha Yoga and tying it to the Gita. I'm deepening my own understanding of that small book, which is complex. So my question is about the correlation you had, speaking of analogies and correlations, between manas and buddhi as reason and intuition. Now, of course, I recognize that, this human form is, the Shula Sarira, the myopic, but recently people are talking, in recent decades or years, about the enteric nervous system in our gut, that plexus of nerves, as where our sort of gut feelings, our intuition might be located. Then we have our cortical, in our brain, our skull, mind, with all that rational stuff. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about how that might have a correlate in our physical bodies to buddhi and manas, the intuition and the reason.
Yes, I've heard that. I don't really know very much about that. I don't feel very qualified to comment on that. I think it's interesting. The breakthroughs in studies about the microbiome and how it affects all kinds of things, mental health, as well as other kinds of health. It is interesting, and there are as many nerve connections in the gut as there are in the brain. So it's there. I don't know about exact correlations. We have inherited that traditional thing about where people talk about having a gut feeling, and perhaps there is a physical correlation there. Certainly that expression precedes studies on the microbiome, and it goes way back, but it must be the experience many of us have had of where something hits us as true and it bypasses reason. We don't have to stop with some slow process of what premises do I know, what inferences do I follow, coming, premise, inference, conclusion. Something we see the truth of it immediately. And often that's used in very practical matters. It could be, if you own a business and you want to hire somebody, you had a gut feeling the moment the person walked in that that's the right person for the job. Or some other kinds of decision. You were hiking up a trail and you decided on a gut feeling you took the right fork, and then you later discovered that the left fork was washed out. So we do have that. It implies a knowing that is not in the pictures of the head or the language of the head. It bypasses pictures and language. That's what it says to me.
Yes.
Gyro? And you're muted, yes. We can't hear you, even though you're unmuted. I wonder if you've got a mic that's not... Go deep into the machine.
Yeah, if it's a technical problem, you could also put it into the chat.
We're going to go with David, Gyro, while you work that out. David?
Hi.
Hi.
Somehow listening to the talk on Buddhi Yoga, a quote from Robert F. Kennedy came to my mind, and I thought maybe I'd share it and you could tell us what you think of it. It has something to do with Buddhi Yoga. He said, some men see things as they are and ask why. I dream things that never were and ask why not.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the dialectic between the actual and the ideal, and that's a very interesting thing to think about, because when we talk about something being real, some people mean, when they talk about reality, they mean the actual, and that's sort of the Aristotelian view. And then some people, when they speak about something being real, they're speaking of the ideal. That's the Platonic view.
Mm-hmm.
HPB says both have to work together, and both in a certain context, either one, could be true. But we do tend to be limit our ideas of the possible through being overly focused on the actual, and therefore abort opportunities that might otherwise bear fruit if we were more tuned in. So on the other hand, you can have the dreamy idealist, someone who's so into ideas, but they just do not have the equipment for translating it, or the discipline, or the instruments, or the, so there's a dialogue that goes on between the two.
Thank you.
Gyro, any hope?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
So I I was wondering, when you were talking about the Dharma, it's like the duty, is that right? And then you say something to the effect that that we're getting influence from culture and things, parents and job, that is pushing us to do something, but we have to maybe look deep inside to find what is the duty that, where does that come from, that is absolutely correct? I don't know. What can you talk about that again?
Yeah, it's, there's that whole, the deeper or esoteric view of St. Paul's statement, come out and be separate. There's the sense in which we are deeply enmeshed in the thought forms and the assumptions, often the lowest common denominator of our culture, of our families, where we aren't truly free. We're conditioned in so many ways of in thought and action and in conception. And so, but spiritual life involves a radical reformation of all of that. It's to remake our thinking and feeling based upon truer premises. And to do that, it means we have to pull back and we have to question. We have to question every value and everything that is conditioning us. We have to be aware, become aware of how we're conditioned, and then we have to gracefully, hopefully not becoming militant and anarchic about it. But this is what regeneration, spiritual regeneration means. It's a fundamental reform or rebirth that has to come from our deepest feelings, our deeper glimpses, our deepest insights, to be true to them all the time, to yoke ourselves, to remind ourselves every day what have been the most important points of my life, what have been the most important meetings I've ever had with individuals, can I be true to those today? Can I bring those through? It requires that kind of mental discipline, and often that can mean, probably most of us here on the screen can tell stories about how it literally meant we had to change relationships, we had to change associations with different people.
Wouldn't that go against duty? Like, say, one is married and has a duty towards the wife, and then one goes in, like you say, and they decide, oh, this is not right for me. So you get out of that. So you're being selfish, and so where is the duty then?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. I think Vinoba Bhave, I think, tells the story has a little story about a man waking up in the middle of the night, saying, God, I want to seek you, but he looks at his wife sleeping and he looks at the baby at her breast and he says, oh, they're holding me back, and he says, I think I'm going to go off and follow the true path. And as he's leaving, God is calling after him, saying, no, stop, fool. The truth you want is right there in your conditions. So it really is an inner freedom. And you're absolutely right. We forge certain relationships, especially the marital relationship, or family relationships. And that we have to learn to see it differently. It's cowardly to say every time one's discontent, or I mean, what a weak spiritual life it would be if it was, limited by our imagination in that way. But they're I was thinking about when we're young people, a lot of times the superficial friendships we have, before we start forming more dharma relationships with people, sangha relationships with people, there can be this experience about pulling away. And I mentioned the pianist and founder of the Wolf Foundation, Hélène Grimaud, and she, after going through the conservatory and all of that, she just innately went into this period of a couple of years, sort of incubation, where she had to pull back from everything in order to hear. She wanted to hear music in her own way. She needed to get the voices of her professors out of her head and the conditioning that had gone on at the conservatory, because she really knew there was a whole nother approach. And in that was her vitality and energy, and in that was her contribution to the world of music, which she has made brilliantly.
What about Arjuna and Krishna? What if Krishna hadn't been there to tell him that it's your duty to fight? What if Arjuna had gone inside and said, no, I should love everyone and I shouldn't fight. I'm gonna be like Jain or a Buddhist, like non-violence, and do ahimsa, and so tell everyone to stop this fighting. Let's negotiate. Then the Bhagavad Gita would have not been written. And so I'm thinking that maybe the Gita was a response to Buddhism at a certain time, where Buddhism and maybe Jainism was was getting too influential, and so the Hindus, they said, we got to do something. We got to do something. So they came up with the Gita and inserted it into the Mahabharata.
Jairo, don't forget the Mahabharata. The Gita is a chapter of the Mahabharata.
Yeah, but they inserted it in there. Like the Mahabharata is old, yes.
Yeah.
But then they said, okay, we got to do something. We inserted the Gita in there.
No, but the whole Mahabharata is
stopping time, and it was like a bringing together all the Upanishads into the Gita.
But I think, don't forget,
this is our answer to Buddhism, and we're going to define Dharma as doing your duty and get all us Hindus to do our duty to be good Hindus and stop this Buddhism because it's ruining the Hindu.
We don't have much time, and Laura does have a question, and we'll end with that.
Briefly, don't forget, there are a lot of proponents of nonviolence, of ahimsa, are readers and lovers of the Gita. And the Gita is an analogy, it's a metaphor. It's just people go wrong taking it literally, just like people go wrong taking Plato's Republic literally. So even though Socrates points out, he's merely drawing an analogy. So one has to conquer the lower nature. There isn't another way around it. Laura, please.
Well, one of the ways we can think of that idea of the Bhagavad Gita is that we learn to recognize that our husband or our wife, our cousin or our brother is actually Krishna himself. And we have to kill out the idea that they are these relationships to us and that they define us. And all of that must be slain. And we begin to realize the self in all. And so we can look at it from that higher point of view. My child is more than just my child. He is a child of the universe. He is Krishna himself. And so we look at our relationships from a higher point of view, rather than my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister. And I think that's what is meant, from at least at this point in time, for this student.
That's beautiful, Laura. It also points out that the instruction, if we are all Arjunas, the instruction from Krishna could come from any source, from any person around us who is under the influence of Buddhi at the time.
Yes, thank you.
Desiree, I think we also might make a mention of comments in the chat. It looks like there are around 10 of them.
I was just going to do that. Thank you, Monica. And Percy writes, thanks for the wonderful talk. Victor has a couple of messages. Outstanding presentation, lecture. Thank you for sharing. And I think he also wrote they should not define us, rather refine us. I think he's talking about
that's
like family and stuff like that. And Liseth wrote, thank you so much. This presentation was beautiful and very inspirational. Thank you. Judy wrote, profound talk. Thank you again. And Hayiro said, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you as well, because that was profound and moving and all of those things. And I learned a lot. Thanks so much, Joseph.
Thank you, Desiree. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, I wish everyone a pleasant evening, and I look forward to seeing everyone here next Sunday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Again.
Namaste.
Namaste to all.